It is told in the lore of the elder days that of all the great deeds of war wrought by the fathers of men, the most renowned is the last stand of the men of Dor-lómin. And so we come to the solemn account of that day, and of the man who stood at its heart when all hope had failed, Húrin Thalion, the steadfast.
Aurë and Entuluva. In the high speech of the Eldar, this means, quite simply, day shall come again. It was a cry of pure, ultimate defiance, spoken into the very teeth of despair, a testament of faith against the final encroaching dark.
Because this is the tale of the Nirnath Arnoiad, the battle of unnumbered tears. It tells of a great victory that was almost within grasp and then tragically lost. It tells of a fellowship of arms that was sworn and then betrayed from within. And it tells of a rearguard that held its ground, purchasing with their very lives a future they would never, ever see. To truly comprehend the sorrow of that day, we first have to look to the great hope that came right before it. You see, after the Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame, the free peoples of Beleriand were scattered and in retreat. But Maedhros, eldest son of Feanor, he forged a mighty plan, one single, final assault on Angband to overthrow the power of Morgoth for all time. This great endeavor, this was the union of Maedhros. From the east and from the west, the greatest army that Beleriand had ever seen began to gather. The eastern host, with Maedhros himself at its head, was made up of the sons of Feanor, the grim dwarves of the Blue Mountains, and the newly come men of the east. The western host was commanded by Fingon, the High King of the Noldor, and with him marched the elves of Hithlum and the men of the House of Hador. But even as this alliance was being made, the poison of treachery lay hidden deep within its ranks, because some of the Easterlings, well, they held a secret loyalty to the Dark Lord.
And at the very core of that western host, just as he is at the core of this tale, stood the great chieftain of the House of Hador, Húrin, Lord of Dor-lómin.
The Eldar, who held him in such high esteem, they called him Thalion. In the Sindarin tongue, it means the steadfast, or the unyielding. And this wasn't just some fancy title, you understand. It was the absolute truth of his nature, a will of steel that was doomed to be tested beyond all human endurance. Húrin came from the House of Hador, the greatest of the three houses of the Aedyne, and was counted by the elves as an equal to their own lords. As the master of Dor-lómin, he guarded the northern lands in the shadow of the arid Wethrin, the shadowy mountains. His father was Geldor the Tall, who was slain defending the fortress of Ithilsayon, and while he was shorter in stature than others of his line, in sheer strength of body and of will, Húrin was the mightiest of all mortal men of the north. Now, in his younger days, a strange fortune brought Húrin and his brother Hor to the hidden kingdom of Gondolin. There, they won the heart of King Turgon, who came to love them as his own sons. And though he allowed them to leave after a year, it was only under a solemn oath of silence. The friendship that was forged in that secret city, well, it would prove to be a hinge upon which the feet of nations would turn. And so we arrive. It is the fateful morning of Midsummer's Day, in the 472nd year of the First Age. The host of the West, with King Fingon at its head, stood ready on the plains of Anfaglith, waiting, just waiting for the signal from Maedhros to begin the great assault. But the signal, it didn't come. You see, Maedhros and the Eastern host had been delayed by the lies of Olfang the Black, an Easterling who was secretly serving two masters. And so Fingon's army was left waiting, an open target, right before the gates of Angband, while Morgoth patiently laid his trap. The undoing of the Noldor was swift and it was dreadful. To shatter their morale, Morgoth had his captives murder the elf lord Gelmir in plain sight of his kin. Gelmir's brother, Gwyndor, crying out in grief and rage, broke formation and charged, and the entire vanguard of Fingon's host surged after him. This was exactly the opening Morgoth wanted. From the gates of Angband, his main army was unleashed, Balrogs and Orcs and Glaurung the Great Dragon. And in that very same hour, just as Maedhros finally attacked the enemy from the east, the treacherous men of Ulfang turned their coats, attacking the sons of Feanor from behind. In the chaos of the battle, King Fingon was cut off, and he was beaten down by Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs. The High King of the Noldor was dead. The field was lost. The host of the West was broken, its king slain. There was nothing left but a desperate retreat and a pitiless slaughter. And yet,
In that moment of absolute ruin, Húrin and his brother Húr made a stand that will be remembered in song for all the ages of the world. They made their way to King Turgon, whose 10,000 spears from Gondolin were still an unbroken shield wall. And Húr, gifted with the kind of foresight that sometimes comes at the end of a life, spoke a prophecy. He told Turgon that though they would part now forever, from both of their houses, a new star would one day arise. He was speaking of his yet unborn son, Tuor, and of Arundel, who was to come, the hope of both elves and men. But for that star to ever rise, Turgon had to escape. Gondolin, the last hidden fortress of the Eldar, had to endure. So Húrin, and all that was left of the men of Hador, formed a living wall of steel and courage across the fen of Sirek. They decided to stand there until the very end, to shield the retreat of Turgon and his people. The armies of Angband crashed against them like a tidal wave. Húr, brother to Húrin, was the first of the captains to be killed, pierced through the eye by a poisoned arrow. But even though their lord's brother had fallen, the men of Dor-lómin gave no ground. That wall of bodies held firm. The old songs tell us how they fell, one by one, never yielding a single step. Every last man of the House of Hador died in that place, defending the passage. And at the very end, when the fen of Serok was nothing but a mire of blood and all his people were gone, Húrin alone remained standing. He threw away his shield and grabbed the great axe of an orc captain from the mud. The lays of Balerion sing that he killed 70 of Gothmog's own troll guard, and as each enemy fell, his great voice rang out across the battlefield. 70 times his cry echoed, a challenge thrown at the encroaching dark. Aurë Entuluva, day shall come again. This wasn't a prayer for deliverance, it was a prophecy. A defiant declaration that this victory of evil was not, and could never be, the final word. And although this was the greatest defeat ever suffered by elves and men, that last, desperate stand was no true ending. It was, against all odds, the one single deed that preserved the seed from which Morgoth's final ruin would one day grow. Think about it. Because of that sacrifice, Turgon escaped, and the city of Gondolin endured. Because Gondolin endured, Tuor, the son of Húr, was fated to find it. Because Tuor found the city, he married Idril Celebrindil, Turgon's daughter, and their son was Arundel, the star that was prophesied. And it was Arundel who would finally sail into the uttermost west, carrying a Silmaril, to call upon the Valar to deliver the world from Morgoth. This was the chain of hope, and it was forged in the fires of that last stand. But for Húrin himself, no clean death was granted. By the direct command of Morgoth, he was captured alive. For 28 long years he was chained to a chair of stone on the high peaks of Thangordrum, and through the Dark Lord's malice, he was forced to watch the tragedy that befell his own children. And yet, even that long torment did not break him. The spirit of Thalion the Unyielding could not be vanquished. And the legacy of his house? It didn't fail. Though the men of the House of Hador were all slain, their line was not extinguished. From his brother Húr came Tuor, and from Tuor descended the kings of Númenor, and in the long ages after, the Dúnedain of the north, and finally, Aragorn Elisar of the reunited kingdom. The ancient lore really does speak truly. This was so much more than a battle. It was a testament of hope against despair, a sacrifice that bought a future for a world its heroes would never live to see. The tale of Húrin Thalion shows us that even in total defeat, one single act of unyielding valor can plant the seed of a final victory, proving that even in the deepest, blackest dark, day shall come again.